Good afternoon, everybody. Dale Vince.
Thank you, everybody. And apologies for being late. I got stuck in traffic. Still, it wouldn't be right to turn up on time, would it?
You're only 7 minutes late, so
that's
we're
not
okay.
bad. That's not bad.
So, Dale, you actually grew up in a seaside town like this, didn't you? Like a smaller version.
Yeah, so I grew up in Great Yarmouth on the other coast, down south a little bit, but a lot like this. I don't think it had it did have a little bit of a tower. Fish and chip shops, beach, amusement arcades, all the ingredients are there.
So, despite growing up there, though, you sort of had a questioning mind from the start, didn't you? Because I remember growing up in a seaside town myself. There isn't a lot of stuff, alternative stuff in a seaside town. But when you were growing up in Great Yarmouth, right from very early days, when you're 7 or 8 years old, you're already starting to think the world's not quite what you're getting told, is it?
Yeah, I suppose. The things I bumped into first as a kid were the idea of eating animals. That was the first thing. It seemed wrong to me. It seemed wrong for all kinds of reasons, not least like the revolting nature of knowing what I was chewing and how chewy it was and what parts of an animal it might be, that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, God, do I actually have to eat animals to live, right? And fortunately, I didn't. And the other thing was, at school, just seeing so many cars on the road, and there wasn't that many compared to today, and imagining each of them with a 10-gallon fuel tank and how many gallons of fuel that was and where that all came from. And I was struck by the thought that it had to run out, right? But nobody talked about it running out. That would have been in the 70s. So just those two things as a kid.
You weren't, but that makes you sound like a very serious kid, but I don't think you were really, were you?
I was seriously unruly, I think, is what I was. Was I serious? I don't know. I liked science and stuff like that. I was a football fan, loved to play football. I think I was a kid that just bumped into, I don't want to call it the system, but I bumped into the way of things, into like rules at school and stuff like that. I used to get in trouble for wearing neon socks, for example. I was always in trouble. But I just was somebody that kicked back against the rules because I just didn't like them.
Mm. And you left school when you were about 15, didn't you?
Yeah, I was 15 when I left, yeah.
And joined, sort of hung out with the local, you didn't really join the biker gang because you didn't really join a gang, did you? You just hung out with the local bikers.
Yeah, I think I kind of got assimilated into the gang eventually, but then I decided it was time to leave anyway. I needed to leave town and leave home, and that's what I did next. And a few years later, I left towns, plural, and that kind of way of life, living in urban environments and stuff like that, and I hit the road. I became a traveller.
I mean, the travel thing's quite formative, isn't it? I mean, in that space with those kind of people you're hanging out with there's a lot of ideas floating around, and I think what you've kind of done is very much born out of that world, isn't it?
Yeah, I learned a lot living on the road. I mean, I learned a lot of personal skills, self-reliance. I was my own plumber, electrician, mechanic, welder, all that kind of stuff. So there's that on the one hand, but also I was exposed to a bunch of different ideas. A lot of people on the road were very alternative. Self-sufficiency was a big deal. Vegetarian veganism was kind of, common. And we were all looking for a different way to live. We all thought the world should be different to what it was, I guess. And so I got exposed to a lot of alternative thinking. Yeah, and I probably chipped a little bit in myself as well.
And you were also building your own trucks, weren't you? Go around scrap yards, and I mean, very much fundamentally core in that kind of world, wasn't it?
It was
that bit of building your own trucks, scrap yards. It's kind of almost like recycling everything, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like we had virtually no money, most everything that we had, we would make ourselves, or we would find neglected and unwanted somewhere in a field or in a yard or something. We like the Wombles in a way. We weren't as cute and furry as they were, but we got all of our stuff off the discarded pile of everyday people.
And then you started building windmills. Yeah.
Yeah. So I lived on the road for 10 years, the entire 1980s. And towards the end, I had a little windmill powering my trailer and stuff like that, if that's what you're referring to. I mean, that marked really a big transition for me. The end of the 80s, I was familiar with wind energy. I spent 10 years living on the road, and I became aware of big wind energy. It was just starting in the early 90s, and I had this moment where I thought I could spend another 10 years living this lifestyle myself, or I could drop back in, try and build a big windmill, try and change how electricity was made in our country. It was at the time the biggest single cause of climate emissions, and I'd just become aware of the climate crisis as well. And that seemed to be a really worthwhile thing to give a go, you know. I had no money, no kind of qualifications. I had nothing, actually. I lived on a hill in a trailer with a little windmill, and I had this big idea. I knew it was windy because I powered myself with a windmill, so you always know if you're parked in a windy spot, so I knew that, and that's what I had.
So was the vision there from the start? Or was it just, did you go in little steps? You know, you build one windmill, then a bigger one, and then it kind of, the vision sort of unfurls? Or was it actually deliberate from day one? You know, if I can make this work, I can actually bring the big vision.
No, it was one windmill. The plan was just to build a big windmill. I didn't look past that. And to be honest, it was such a big undertaking. It did take 5 years. Part of that was because I had a lot of battles along the way with the planners, with the grid company, with the National Trust, with some local people. But also because I was starting from scratch, from ground zero with nothing, no money, training, credibility, and that kind of stuff. I needed a wind tower first to measure the wind at 30 meters in height. I didn't have the money to buy one, so I made one with the equipment I had around me as you know, kind of from my traveling life. So I made my own tower, and that turned into then a business because other people entering the business of wind energy also needed towers, and I started to make towers for other people. It eventually became a global exporter of towers all around the world, as far away as Australia, which is a bit mad really to be sending steel tubes to Australia, but hey ho. And then as I tackled each step of this first windmill, like planning application, environment impact assessments, grid applications, and finally funding, and then the civil engineering, I was in the hole digging out the foundation myself. I learned everything. That became a blueprint, and it was probably some months before I built the first one, I could see it coming, that I thought, you know, I should carry on. I should do some more. Why stop?
And through that process, is that when the vision thing started to happen then? You know, the idea that you could basically, I don't know, I wouldn't say bankroll it, but so maybe the ideas of the green revolution. Do you see there's so much more you can actually do with this?
Yeah, so the next step after building the first windmill, or just before it, about a year before, to build more windmills, I realized I needed to get a fair price for the energy, and I approached the local power company. They were monopoly buyers at the time. That's how the energy market in our country worked. And I went to see them and offered them green electricity, and they laughed at the idea. Literally, they laughed at me, and they said, what is it? Who wants it? And here's, by the way, a rubbish price, because you can't sell it to anybody else. But Margaret Thatcher, right, a name that should elicit boos and hisses, it does most places I go. It does here for me. She did one thing that I think we might want to thank her for. She liberalized the energy market. And so in 1995, when I had this grid company conversation, I knew that it was possible to become an energy company myself very shortly. So I left that meeting and decided that I had to do that. I had to form an energy company to cut out this difficult middleman and reach the end user people with this new kind of electricity that hadn't been sold anywhere in the world at that time, actually. And I filled in a form back in the day of faxes. I sent that to Ofgem, the regulator, by fax. It was only 4 or 5 sides of A4. And they gave me a license. Not a literal one I could hold, but they gave me a license to be an energy supplier. And so I formed Ecotricity in 1995, just before the first windmill in 1996. And that was all part of this plan to reach the end user, reach people with green electricity, and in that way, build more windmills.
And the success of this then created a space where you can move on to other projects as well, didn't it?
Mm. Yeah, so as I said a minute ago, back in the early 90s, I knew that the way we made electricity was the biggest single source of carbon emissions in our country. By the early 2000s, having pretty much found an answer for that, which was wind energy, I started to think that there must be a second and third biggest source of carbon emissions in our country, and found that it was transport and food in that order. And the energy, transport and food is a descending order of impact. between them, we're responsible for 80% of everybody's carbon emissions, personal carbon emissions, and also for companies and organizations pretty much of any size. It's a fantastic kind of universal slide rule that you can run over. And so I started to think about transport and food, and we expanded our mission from energy to include those two, and also nature, a bit of rewilding, buying farmland to give it back to nature. And it was in 2008 that I decided I needed to build an electric car, because I was a self-declared petrol head and tree hugger. I liked fast motorbikes and cars and stuff like that. Couldn't buy a green car. There were no electric cars in the world. So we set out to build one, Britain's first electric car, as it turned out, a car called the Nemesis. And that began a journey for us into a new sector of life, which is the world of transport, which we believe then, and I believe now still, just has to be electrified. We just have to take fossil fuels out of transport.
The diversification of the activities is key. It's fundamental to this, isn't it?
I guess it's a big part of the story, for sure. And the vision in the book is simply that we have to tackle energy, transport and food. That's 80% of all of the problems. The crises we face, the multiple overlapping crises we face, are the climate one. We've all heard of that. There's the global decline of nature. I think we're facing the sixth mass extinction of life on our planet. And then there's a human health crisis as well. And they're all caused by just two things: the mass burning of fossil fuels and industrial animal farming. And they're the two things that we have to change. And in the book, I set out the vision, the view really, that we have all of the technology we need. The economics are on our side. The people increasingly are on our side to make this transition to a green economy. And what we did lack when I wrote the book was a government that got it and was doing something about it. We actually had a government that was doing the opposite. And obviously things changed radically 3 or 4 weeks ago when Labour came to power. And now we have everything we need actually to make this incredible transition to a green Britain.
I mean, the arguments you make are very strong arguments. I mean, it's not just obviously we need to go in a green direction, and it's a nice idea, but it's also a business idea. It does work. Yeah. This is not like hardship, is it? It's not like we're going to have to dress up as monks and live in huts, is it?
Yeah, there's a lot to say there. I mean, at the heart of our approach is to say to people, it's not about giving stuff up, actually. This net zero, green living, call it what you like. It's not about lentils and sandals, although I love them both. We can have the things that we love or the things that we like. We just have to find another way to do them. And so a lot of our work has been about finding that other way. In energy, it's been about the wind and the sun, most recently green gas that we're making from grass. In transport, it was an electric car. Then we built a national network of charging points to enable that to happen. We launched an electric airline last year, which I think is the kind of last frontier of the electrification of transport. And at the same time, you mentioned, excuse me, there's the coffee.
It's all right, it's a punk festival. We're all good.
The economics have changed. So when I began in 1995, I thought I can go one of two directions with this. I can take a business approach, or I could take a charity approach and say to people that this is an altruistic thing, a good thing, and you should pay me to do this stuff. Or I could take the business approach and say, look, this is good for you. It's kind of we had a thing where we sold energy that didn't cost the earth, and by that we meant it was priced reasonably, competitively, and of course it was environmental as well. We've come a long way in the decades since then, and a few years ago, John, we began taking a different approach, and we made the argument for 100% green electricity, or green energy in fact, in our country, not on the basis of polar bears and ice caps, but jobs and GDP, because green energy had become such an economic option for us, opportunity for us, that the benefits we wanted from the get-go, fight the climate crisis and all that kind of stuff, they become the icing on the cake. And partly it's a strategic move, because millions of people in our country care much more about the bills they face every day than they care about polar bears. They may care about them, but they've got more pressing priorities. And by arguing about jobs and GDP, we can get more people on board for essentially the same mission, which is to green up our energy supply and do the single biggest thing we can to combat the climate crisis.
Do you think when you took over Forest Green Rovers, this is the point where the mission kind of changes, and it becomes more populist in a sense, and it's a different part of a newspaper, isn't it? It sort of moves onto the back pages and the front pages.
Yeah, it's interesting because Forest Green Rovers was a rescue mission. It was my local football club. It was 2010, it was facing relegation and bankruptcy, and the guys there kind of got me to come and watch a game, and it was a lovely place, lovely people, that kind of stuff. I gave them some money to help them get through the summer, and at the end of the summer they said, you need to be the chairman or it's going to go belly up. And I was too busy, I didn't want to do it, but I didn't want to see it fail. It was a 120-year-old big part of this local community, and I like to describe my entry into the world of football, my rescue of Forest Green Rovers as serendipity, a happy accident, because I shrugged my shoulders and thought, well, how hard can it be to run a football club? I quickly found out. And it's been a really epic journey. But along the way, what we discovered was that football was this amazing platform for reaching people. Now, at the beginning, everybody said to me, especially the people in the world of football, they said, this will never work, right? I've heard that before. They said, football fans won't accept the environment. There's no place in football for the environment. If you fast forward to today, then Premier League clubs have environment programs, ambitions, and that kind of stuff. The United Nations came to us at Forest Green Rovers 6 years ago, I think it was, and they said they liked what we were doing and they wanted to launch a global version of it. And essentially what that's about is about reaching the billions of sports fans around the world through their favorite sport and talking to them about the climate crisis and how they can live their lives differently in order to affect that. It's called Sport for Climate Action. We became a founding signatory, and I don't think there's a better example of what we found at Forest Green Rovers, which is this incredible ability and platform to reach people and get them to change how they live. Our fans have gone from, I would say, more than a little skeptical, to people that have gone veggie and vegan. They've bought electric cars and solar panels and just embraced the whole green 9 yards. And the world around us has changed. Visiting directors, they used to come to our place and they would kind of they would have a kind of mocking look about them back in the day. They come here now, not here, but where we are now, and they want to tell me what they're doing. They want to tell me about their solar panels and their car chargers and stuff like that. I mean, it's just changed radically. And the important point for me is that if we can reach football fans and have a conversation with them about how they need to live differently, we can reach anybody.
I mean, how much did you actually have to change at the club, the culture of it?
We didn't change the name.
So everything then, basically.
Everything.
Is there a lot of misconceptions that go around it? I sort of read stuff online. People say that you force all the players to be vegan and all this kind of thing, which is not the case at all, is it?
No, that's right. It's common. It even comes up now more than 10 years later. Like, is there a clause in the players' contracts that says they have to go vegan or something like that? We take a really, I think, logical approach to this, where something's in our control. As a football club, we do the same at Ecotricity, and we're a whole group of companies now. Where it's in our control, then we do it according to our principles. And when it comes to food, it's plant-based, right? No harm to animals. And so when we're feeding staff, fans, and players, it's plant-based. What they all do on their own time is up to them. And that's part of our approach, which is to not dictate or preach to people or lecture people, but just to do what we believe to be right, show people how it works, and then leave it with them, let that idea percolate through.
I think almost in a way, it's kind of an interesting experiment, isn't it? Because like you say, the only thing you didn't change was the name of the club. Because you couldn't, it's almost the perfect name for a vegan football club, isn't it? But you change, the shirts made out of bamboo, the way you grow the grass on the ground. Yeah. The plans for the new stadium, if it ever comes off, will be, that's negative carbon, if I remember, isn't it? So there's all these plans and all these things put into place, and it's almost a place where you can do the diversification of ideas in a practical kind of way, and the club was perfect for that, wasn't it?
Yeah, the club was perfect for that, because everything that we worked on and believed was visible at the club in energy, transport and food. We did explore bamboo as a material for the shirts, used coffee grounds as well. The pitch is organic. Obviously all the food and drink is vegan. All kinds of changes. We even changed the name of the road that the stadium sits on to become Another Way, which seems like a really neat thing to do. Yeah.
And how far are you up to now with the new stadium?
New stadium, that was it, yeah. So we knew from the get-go that the location that we're on, I don't know if anybody here has ever been to Forest Green? Yeah, come on. Yeah, so you'll know, right? Top of a steep hill, hard to get to, no parking. On a busy day, we need a tanker of water because the mains that feeds us, the pipe is so small it can't keep up. We run out of power as well and stuff like that, all kinds of fundamental problems. So we went looking for a new place in the district for a new stadium, and one thing led to another, and we put out a competition to architects, international one as it turned out, for design of a low carbon footprint stadium. The winners were Zaha Hadid's practice. They said they wouldn't normally get involved in a project this small, but they liked the brief. And what they came up with was an entirely wooden football stadium. And I like to describe it as having the lowest carbon footprint of any sports stadia since the Romans invented concrete. And 2 weeks ago, we've just seen that Roma, club in Italy, have actually come up with an almost identical plan. The image of their stadium is like a slightly taller version of our stadium. Now, ours has been around probably nearly 10 years now. We haven't managed to build it yet. We've been bogged down in planning and stuff. But that's exciting, because if there's another club in the world that wants to build an all-wooden football stadium, it's just another great piece of change. I mean, I hold it to be the case that there are two ways to make change in the world. One is to do things yourself, but that's necessarily limited for any of us. Even with 800 people in my team, there's a limit to what I can do. The second is to be a catalyst, to cause other people to see what you're doing and to pick that up and run with it. This is what Roma are now doing, and we've seen it before in all of our work in energy, transport and food, and it's arguably the best way to create change. But you have to do the first one first. If you don't do it yourself, then you aren't showing other people that it works.
So it doesn't really bother you if somebody else picks up the idea, as long as the idea is happening and exists and is the catalyst, and that sort of knocks on for another idea, that's fine as well.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. Somebody tries to claim credit for the idea, I might get a little bit kind of upset about that, but I haven't got a problem with people saying, well, I like that, I'm going to do it as well.
Mm. And hopefully you'll get the ground built, but it's stuck, as you say, in planning permission still, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we've got planning permission, and there's all kinds of complicating factors around the site and stuff like that. But the biggest impediment I think we've had is the planning system in Britain, the way the local authorities approach planning applications, which to me seems to be from a starting position of no, and then what can we make you compromise on, and what can we get from you before we give you permission. And so we've been fighting them battles for years. Like, for example, excuse me, every time I drink coffee I want to burp. I'm going to stop drinking it. The site itself that we've got is 100 acres, and part of the plan is a 4,000 green tech business park and a training complex for Forest Green as well. Now, we've just built 2 training pitches for the coming season, which is going to be fantastic for us. But it took 2 years to get planning permission to build 2 football pitches on a grass field. I mean, that's an example of how hard it is. But the great news about Labour winning, I know you guys saw the announcement this week from Angie Rayner. She's come up with a new term, the grey belt, which is basically green belt that's not pulling its weight. It's land that doesn't perhaps properly fit the description of green belt. In our case, there's an industrial heritage zone, which is a grass field, which causes all this trouble. It used to have a canal on it. It's got nothing on it now except grass, and it's causing us all kinds of planning problems. And I think this will fit perfectly into this new category of land that's been categorized for protection, which is holding back development around it when it really shouldn't be. There will be a canal, goes back across that land. It's our land now, and we are enabling that. But I think not all of our problems, but the last problems that we face in getting this project moving and built is a Labour government. I think it's about to change everything.
Yeah, because we have to have stuff, don't we? We have to have things where we go to. So we have to make them with the least worst impact, isn't it? So we have to put it in the least worst piece of land, basically. That's
another myth, and I've faced these criticisms before. We call this place Eco Park. It's a 100-acre site. We'll have a 20% biodiversity boost after we've built a 4,000-job business park and a sports stadium and a training ground and a canal as well. 20% boost over the background, which is farmland. And that's because farmland is so bad, actually. It's like wildlife desert. But I've been criticized a number of times in a kind of lazy way, I think, by people that don't want us to build it. They aren't particularly interested in the environment. They just say, how can you call yourself green if you're building something and you're building it on a green field? And as you say, John, the point I make to them is that we have to have homes, we have to have places for people to live, we have to have places for people to work, we have to build things. We can't stop. That's not what being green is all about. It's how you build it that matters, and Eco Park will be a fantastic example of how we can build and have all of these things and enable wildlife at the same time. It can be done.
Which is a very different way of thinking than people who've got an eco green leaning normally have, isn't it?
Yeah.
People think that those ideas are there to hold things back, aren't they? But you're actually more into pushing things forward, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. There's all kinds of misconceptions about what it is to be green. One of the most amusing criticisms in that vein that I've faced is that I'm chopping down trees to build a stadium. How can that be green? I'm a bit like, well, trees grow, actually. Obviously, don't you know that? That's like, come on. Compared to like concrete and steel, for example, because that's the alternative. And something like 80% of the carbon footprint of a sports stadium in its entire lifetime is from the materials it's built with. It's embedded on day one. That's why our stadium will be such a low carbon footprint, because it's made with trees, and they have a far lower carbon footprint than concrete and steel.
So by taking over Forest Green and sort of exploring all these other ideas, I can't remember exactly the chronology of this, but is that when you start to diversify out from like the wind power, etc.? Is that, when you start doing the food for schools, the Sky Diamonds?
Yeah.
Was the football club the kind of turning point, the fulcrum?
So in terms of the chronology, it was wind energy all the way up until about 2010, and then we built Britain's first solar park, and in that year launched the Nemesis, the electric supercar, and brought green gas to Britain as well for the first time. The idea that we can have gas made from organic material in a renewable way and put it in the gas grid like we do with electricity. It was a busy year, 2010. There was a lot went on, and the rescue of Forest Green Rovers. And then the school dinners came a couple of years later. We call it the Devil's Kitchen. It's a company that makes plant-based school dinners. We're in 1 in 4 English primary schools now with entirely plant-based food, and we're in secondary schools as well. And it's like super popular. The Sky Diamond thing, which is we make diamonds out of atmospheric carbon. That was an idea I had around about 2010. I was thinking about geoengineering, the ideas of kind of large-scale interference in the way our world works in order to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. There are lots of different ways to do it, and I was just daydreaming about that, and struck by the thought that getting it out of the atmosphere is only half the job, this carbon. We have to lock it up into something permanent, and the most permanent form of carbon we know about is the diamond. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could actually take carbon out of the atmosphere and turn it into diamonds? It took about 7 years of R&D to do that, and I think we launched it just before the pandemic, actually, around about 2020. We'd been making them for a while, perfecting it's a mixture of art and science, I think, to do this. It's kind of, I like to think of it as 21st century alchemy, because it seems like a very improbable thing to do, but we do it. And it's a great example for us when we're having this discussion, making this case to people that we can have all of the things that we want to have, whether it's cars, burgers, football, as you've said before, John, and now even diamonds. There is another way to do everything. And then since then, we've done a couple of other things as well.
And also your profile in the last few years is much higher, because you were just kind of sort of beavering away literally in Stroud doing all this stuff, but now you're always going on TV, and the most unlikely places as well, which I think is quite brilliant as well. So you've been on Nigel Farage's show, taking these ideas to people probably completely baffled by what you're talking about, but in a really brilliant way. You must be the most patient person on television.
It may be so. It may be so. What you're talking about there, John, is I spent time on right-wing TV and radio, mostly really, in order to reach a different audience, not to be in the echo chamber that I could so easily be in, communicating, let's say, to Guardian readers or something like that. I don't know. I read the Guardian, by the way. That's not a diss. And it began with the Daily Express. And we launched a campaign together, a Green Britain campaign. It was incredibly improbable. They turned their masthead green for the day. We've been doing it now for nearly 3 years. They got fantastic feedback from their readers, such that they just kept doing more and more environment reporting. And at one point, 18 months ago, we checked in the month of August in the summer, the number of articles in the Daily Express on the climate and the environment, and in the Guardian. They were neck and neck. And that was a real transformation of that newspaper. And I've been on Have a Pint with Nige, I think it was called, and all kinds of other shows. I mean, there are a couple of people out there that I won't go on with anymore because they have this style, I'm going to call it. They just talk over you. They don't listen and that kind of stuff. Anybody that is willing to have a conversation, I'm willing to go on with. And what I've learned from that is what the myths, the preconceptions, the problems are that people on, let's just say the right wing of life, what problems they see with the whole green transition, whether it's green energy, plant-based food, whatever it is. I had a famous ding-dong with Piers Morgan, which descended into farce on the subject of avocados, because he thought if you're advocating any kind of green issue and you eat avocados, you're a hypocrite. That was his thing. That was his kind of gotcha kind of moment to me. And I'm like, yeah, I eat avocados, but not every day, Piers. You know what I mean? It's not a big deal. And he said, well, they all come from America, where they murder billions of bees in this industry to produce avocados. And I'm like, well, look, murder is obviously wrong. I know that they use bees, and I think billions is probably also an exaggeration. But by the way, avocados don't just come from America. He's like, yes, they do. I said, well, he said, where do they come from then? I said, well, I get them from Spain. He said, how do you know? It was so funny. And I said to him, because I read the label. I was like, it was a mic drop moment. And he couldn't get past it. And afterwards, his followers on social media were killing him. They were telling him he was done. He was schooled. He was showed how to have a debate or whatever it was. It was hilarious. But the point is to try and reach his audience, other people's audience, and communicate with them, to tell them things that they don't know, and to give them the answers to these things they hold dear. Like, I think I was talking about this at WOMAD at the weekend. So top myth around green energy amongst these people is that we don't have enough. And so I tell them that we have enough wind and sun to power the country 20 times over. This is what I'll say on a radio or TV show. And then the presenter will come back and say, yes, but we don't have enough land. And so I retort with the statistic that we need just 1% of our land to do the job. So then they come back and they say, but it's going to cost an awful lot of money. So I tell them that we need no public money, actually, to build onshore wind and solar. 3 myths completely busted. And then really the last thing they have is probably to say to me, but what about China? Which is such a cop-out, right? And once you get to that level, you know you've won. And it's time to move on. But our argument, of course, right now is been aided by the energy crisis, because I'm able to say, if we were energy independent, a concept we came up with decades ago, if we were energy independent, we wouldn't have had that energy crisis, because we allow global markets to set the price of fossil fuels, even when we make them here. Half our gas comes from the North Sea. At the peak of the energy crisis, we paid 10 times more for it because global markets said that was the price. So our argument now is aided by that. £4,000 a year energy bills. A lot of people will remember that for a long time. And we can have bills that are a fraction of that, a quarter of that, once we reach energy independence with renewable energy. And the fact that we have enough energy, we have enough land, and the grid, the national grid, have said that we can be 100% powered by renewable energy. All of these facts are very helpful in persuading a whole bunch of people that it's actually in their interest. It's not something they should be afraid of or laugh at or dismiss. It's actually in their interest.
Brilliant. Well, thanks that day. We actually have run out of time. But if you want to get more in depth, there's the book. And it's all in the book. And you're going to be giving the books away, aren't you?
Yeah. Yes.
So, but where are we doing that? Is that going to be in the shop next door or the door? What was the plan? I can't remember what the plan was, but there was a plan.
I think it's in the bookshop. That's what I heard.
In the bookshop, the bookstore, which is just through that door there. So if you want a free copy of Dale's book, you're going down there now as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going down there.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Dale.
Taking my coffee. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, John.